Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Small Town Girl from 1936. This is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. Small Town Girl is a film Wellman was put on rather late. It's a romantic comedy, which isn't really something I think most people think of when they think of William Wellman, but he liked to work on different genres, and especially if you're a director then, you did work on different genres. Small Town Girl is definitely, I would consider, a romantic comedy, but isn't that funny. It kind of reminds me more of his work with what was considered a woman's picture at the time, with kind of some comedic leanings. And having seen most of those films, definitely felt more at home with that than as a comedy. Janet Gaynor, who plays Kay Brannon, who's sick of her small town that she's lived in her whole life and wants to move out and go to Boston and get a job, and she's mailed letters to get jobs in Boston, and it's never really worked out. She's kind of frustrated. She knows exactly what everyone's going to say and everything like that. And then there's tons of these rich kid college boys driving to a Yale-Harvard game that are cluttered up the town streets, and they keep flirting with her, and then one guy on the way back flirts with her and gets her to drive him to the bar. Robert Dakin, played by Robert Taylor, and he drives her to this bar. They get really drunk, or he at least gets really drunk. She gets kind of buzzed, I guess, on champagne, and then he says, we're gonna drive to Boston, but then gets lost and winds up at a justice of the peace and gets married. He can't just annul it or divorce her because the papers have found out, and so they have to be married for 6 months, and then they're gonna separate and divorce, which kind of doesn't, I don't understand the logic behind that, but it's a very rom-com concept kind of a movie. Since they're not in love, they have to fake their marriage and be nice to one another, and you can kind of sense what's going to happen next. I was kind of surprised somewhat by this film. I'm not a huge fan of Nothing Sacred. I don't think it aged as well as a lot of Wellman's work does, and I'm not really a fan of Wellman directing comedies, but I think the comedic parts of this worked all right. I think the main thing that works is particularly Janet Gaynor's character, and at the beginning where you really get a sense of her getting sick of her town and being stuck there, and he does a lot of kind of visual cues with that, and especially there's this opening where it shows these two guys playing football that kind of morphs into the football program. Was really great. It kind of has an interesting energy to it. I was a little surprised by it. I know this wasn't like, you know, a standout Wellman film. I've clearly reviewed all the bigger ones, but I was a little surprised by it, particularly how much I liked it. I liked it a lot more than Nothing Sacred, and I think it kind of shows, probably since the strong suit of it is showing how she's unhappy that he doesn't really care that much about her, and when the romantic comedy comes to the inevitable conclusion that you know it's going to come to, it feels a little forced. I'm not sure. I think that might have just been the studio at the time. That happens with a couple Wellman films. I mean, Wild Boys of the Road comes to mind, but it didn't really feel natural. It kind of felt like maybe it should have had the ending that it clearly was leaning towards, where she would go back to her small town. That's kind of unfortunate. I wish that had happened, because I think that would have been a little more interesting. And Hollywood at this time, if you're making a film about a small town girl who would leave and go to the city, they were kind of very conventional. You would miss the small town. And this film kind of does that, but then goes away from it, but doesn't dwell on it, so the audience is like, hey, what are you saying about my small town? You just don't think about it, really. It's kind of like a fun romantic comedy, so it doesn't get into it. It gets close to it, though. And Wellman's good at showing the working man's ethic, but also I think this is the best time he's shown wealth, or one of the best times he's shown wealth with the Robert Taylor character, especially. Jimmy Stewart has a small role in this film. It's kind of surprising to see him with the cast list and him listed at the bottom, which is shocking. I think after a couple of years that wouldn't be happening anymore. And he worked with William Wellman again in Magic Town. I don't know if he worked with him any more than that. And Andy Devine is in this film as well, playing Janet Gaynor's brother, and he's very good. And of course they would both, and Wellman would go on to work on A Star is Born. Janet Gaynor and William Wellman did not get along whatsoever during making this film. In fact, Wellman wanted to leave the film at a certain point. Their styles didn't work together at all, but a year later, actually, when he made A Star is Born, he loved the idea of casting her, and they got along great after that. In fact, he wanted to cast her in Nothing Sacred, but she didn't want to do it, and then she would soon retire. Janet Gaynor and Wellman have a lot in common. Wings won the first Best Picture Oscar, and Janet Gaynor won the first Best Actress Oscar. Janet Gaynor is a good screen actress because she understood silent film acting and she understood sound film acting, and she definitely uses both a lot. She has a vulnerability to her that comes through. Just what she she can do with her eyes and physically that I didn't get as much from Robert Taylor. Robert Taylor feels to me more like a 30s sound actor than Janet Gaynor does. I think she mastered really both. And she has kind of a cuteness and a vulnerability that first you need for a rom-com, certainly, but you also need to get this kind of character to really work and pop. Even though Wellman wanted to be taken off the film, he was actually sick with the flu for 2 weeks, and Robert Z. Leonard actually replaced him for those 2 weeks. So I kind of wonder what Robert Z. Leonard shot and what Wellman shot and what the difference is, and apparently they reworked the ending during that time, so I get the impression maybe they took some days off as well, or what exactly happened with that. I guess we'll never know. Robert Z. Leonard was an director in his own right. He directed The Divorcee and The Great Ziegfeld, both of which were nominated for Best Picture. I don't know what his contributions to it were and what he had done, and maybe what I like about it, he had done some of. Who knows? They shot films fairly quickly at that time, so it's fair to say he probably had a good portion of it is directed by him, but what is and what isn't, I don't know. I couldn't find that information. This is an interesting assignment picture for Wellman. It was a smaller contract he had with MGM, and then he left and made Star is Born. Small Town Girl's got a great pedigree to it. 2 of the screenwriters, there's 4 screenwriters credited, but 2 of them are Albert Hackett and Francis Goodrich, who helped write the Thin Man films and It's a Wonderful Life, and the other 2 credited screenwriters were John Lee Mannon and Edith Fitzgerald with William Wellman. And I think this kind of shows later in his career he clearly didn't like being an assignment director after a certain point, and he didn't really like making this movie, but I think it turned out a lot better than maybe you expect. I think it's a decent little fun romantic comedy. Now, I wasn't expecting much, so maybe that helped. I like Janet Gaynor. I've only actually seen her, well, I guess I've seen Sunrise, I've seen some of her silent stuff. I haven't seen much of her sound work, but between this and A Star is Born, I mean, she had such a great screen presence. Even in this kind of a lesser, more obscure film, this isn't available on DVD, she shines tremendously. And I think Robert Taylor, he is a fairly good leading man. I don't know, I'm not a huge Robert Taylor fan, but I think he was good at playing this kind of rich drunk at the same time as playing someone who is kind of not sure what he wants to do with his life and not exactly sure how he feels about her versus his fiance who he got married to this girl when he already had a fiance, and the conflict between that. He plays it off fairly well. The 2 leads are kind of the most important in a romantic comedy. If they don't work, the picture's not going to work, and they definitely work. I almost consider this woman's picture not a rom-com. Rom-coms definitely have those periods where they get a little moody and a little sappy and sad and things like that. I think this film has a lot of that because it's mainly, not entirely, it switches perspectives a little bit, but it's mainly from Janet Gaynor's perspective. And a lot of romantic comedies have the thing where it's from the woman's perspective. At first she's down in the dumps because she's stuck in a situation, she doesn't have a boyfriend. So not that all women need boyfriends or something, but this is the genre I'm talking about here. But it doesn't let go of the moodiness. It's not like all her problems are solved. I mean, it's kind of a terrible situation she's in, and Janet Gaynor doesn't stray away from that. Wellman and the screenwriters don't stray away from that while still making it a fun romantic comedy. And I think the balance there is kind of why I like Small Town Girl, and why it's not just a simple, forgettable little 30s rom-com or anything like that. I think it has a little bit more about it. It wasn't an amazing film. I was just kind of maybe a little more surprised by it. And he actually did this right after The Robin Hood of El Dorado, which is another film that's not very available from William Wellman, which kind of surprised me and I thought was pretty good as well. He was kind of in an interesting place right now. It felt like he's like building his chops to something, and then he starts working on less and less films, which is kind of, I think, a little unfortunate, but he did make a hell of a lot of films in the 30s. So if you're into Wellman and Janet Gaynor, I think you should definitely check this out. And it plays on TCM every now and then, so keep an eye out for it because it's definitely worth a watch from my perspective. It's a little silly Hollywood romantic comedy, but it's a good, silly, old Hollywood romantic comedy. And sometimes those are fun to watch, and even though you know it's kind of ridiculous, if you really let yourself go with it, I think it's a decent, fun, old studio film. So if you have seen Small Town Girl and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. If you hadn't noticed, I'm kind of doing William Wellman films monthly from now on. There will be another one next month, and I don't really want to say what it is because I might change my mind. But there will be another one next week, and you can check out the other 40 some in my William Wellman review playlist that I have currently. And thank you for watching, and have a great day.